Israeli government and Netanyahu and Zionists, and Zionism doesn't represent all Jews.
Yes.
And I'm here to say, stop being a coward, because I don't think it's Christians or Muslims that are shooting babies in the face in Palestine for sport. I think they are exclusively Jewish.
No, they're not Jewish.
They are Jewish. Well, unless you're talking from a very theological perspective where they're pretending to be Jewish. Cool. Now that I can go with.
It's a big difference.
That I'm very happy to go with. I believe they have adopted the identity of the people in the Old Testament. So a Jew is basically anybody who looks at the Old Testament and goes, that's about me, that is. Now I could do that, or you could do that, or you could do that. We could all read the Old Testament and go, it's written about me, that is. But we don't. And that's why we're not acting like that. However, if you watch the guys that think the Old Testament was written about them, or the people that just support it, who are Zionists, and how they treat me on this box, it's fascinating, because they don't believe in manners, they don't believe in etiquette, they don't believe in the rules of Speaker's Corner. The way that, like, reliably, we have a little group here of about 12, 15 people, and you're all listening.
Most
and
of
you're
them
all...
don't believe in God.
Say again?
Most of them don't even believe in God. They believe
exactly.
they're God's chosen people, but they don't believe in God.
It's secular.
Yeah.
We don't know if Benjamin Netanyahu is supposed to be religious, yet he did quote the Old Testament to justify what's been done. So it's very confusing. I think we know it was originally started as like a political project. But more than that, I am just demonstrating that Zionism is a mental illness by watching the rules of Speaker's Corner reliably break down every time we do this. So an hour ago, I was on the box and I had 3 of them just frothing. They were stood like there and there, way closer than any of you are stood to me right now, completely dominating the conversation, essentially shouting at each other and anyone. And that's all I'm here to prove, that Speaker's Corner, you're supposed to have the right to stand on the box and say what you want without
your hand like this without touching anyone.
Well, what I should do, we want to invest in like some boards and stuff that just have the rules, which is like, if you interrupt the speaker more than 3 times, you got to leave because you're being rude. So we could hold up something to say, that's the first time, that's the second time, just get a bit more formalized. But the big one is, don't get offended when I say the Jews, because I'm referring to the geopolitical body that is working towards Jewish interests, which has now manifested as this Holocaust of the Palestinian people in Palestine. And people get really offended when you say the Jews. Now, I don't know if this is a problem around the rest of the world. That's what I'm trying to ascertain. Are people, you guys don't seem scared that I'm saying the Jews. Yeah. So it's interesting. So you can see this problem? Have you seen how people react? It's interesting because we don't have any of them yet. Speaker's Corner is the home of free speech. I've actually come down here out of necessity because when I tried to do this at a Tommy Robinson rally, I got arrested for a non-crime. I keep getting YouTube channels banned for this kind of stuff, for hate speech and anti-Semitism. So I'm here at Speaker's Corner because it's the only place left. But beyond that, it is the great British tradition of free speech. There's a lot of people that complain, in the Tommy Robinson movement particularly, about how Speaker's Corner has been taken over by Muslims. And I would dispute that, because as an Englishman, when I turn up here and I talk on the box, I tend to have quite a good time talking to the Muslims. It's just there's more of them here and they're more passionate and they're using the space properly. So
I think the most passionate person happens to be a Christian right there. The very loud happens to be a Christian.
He's probably spitting the Bible in his hand.
Yes.
Well, it's just sort of a narrative that free speech is under attack, and I think that this is the home of free speech, not just in the UK, but in the world. And so that's why I'm using this spot. And it is suspicious, the absence of the following people who have full-time careers as free speech advocates, claiming that their free speech is under attack and they're being censored when their YouTube channels are bigger than mine. They might get demonetized, but they don't get banned. I get banned. So I'm putting the call out. I'm saying, yeah, I may be smaller than you guys, but currently you are forfeiting. I have won the debate because you seem to be too scared to show up at the home of free speech, Speaker's Corner, to talk to someone like me. You seem to be terrified of my ideas. And I think it's because you're a coward. So my list of cowards, who are too yellow-bellied, lily-livered, faint-hearted, gutless, spineless, feeble, weak-kneed, and downright scaredy-cat, to come to Speaker's Corner in person, stand up for free speech and debate me. First of all, the Lotus Eaters, namely Carl Benjamin, Harry Robinson, Connor Tomlinson, Josh Fermi, Leo Kurse, and Stelios something or other. I would like to speak with you guys about whether Jeremy Corbyn was wrong to oppose the war on Iraq, whether the campaign against anti-Semitism is the biggest threat to free speech in the United Kingdom, and whether you guys remain proud of your role in the global humiliation of the domestic abuse survivor Amber Heard. Next up is the leader of Patriotic Alternative, Mark Collett. And this is purely because he brags about being the king of online debates, and I know he's incredibly scared of me, so I'm challenging him. Stephen Yaxley Lennon, aka Tommy Robinson, I want to ask him whether he still proudly supports Paul Golding, the cage fighter and leader of Britain First, as a political candidate after he admitted to beating up 2 women on tape. Kelly J. Keane and Graham Linehan of Let Women Speak. I don't know if they're turning up over there later today, because I know that they have a session, I think it's the last Sunday of every month, but I might be wrong, I haven't seen them yet. I want to ask them whether we should let Palestinian women speak, because the entire gender critical movement seems to be behind Israel, and I want to know why. Konstantin Kissin and Francis Foster, the hosts of the Trigonometry podcast. You two, am I still a neo-Nazi for being concerned about the native demography of Britain? Or are we now allowed to discuss it without being called white supremacists? Because you guys banned me and all my followers for being neo-Nazis 5 years ago, and now you've stolen my talking point. Next up is Russell Brand. I want Russell Brand to come down here because he's the champion of free speech, and I want to ask him whether the age of consent in the United Kingdom should be raised from 16 to 18 to protect children from men like him. Lady Victoria Hervey, low-level royal skank, I would like to speak to you about a cease and desist letter that you've been sent by my investor, Maria Farmer, the only person who went to the FBI about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell in the 1990s. Lady Victoria Hervey, you are writing lies about Maria Farmer all over Instagram. This is illegal. You are witness tampering in a federal case. Stop it. Roger Waters, you're not a coward, and I think you should come down to Speaker's Corner one day because you'd get an extremely warm reaction, because Zionists are not welcome here. We're all pro-Palestine, and we'd love to see you here. Tristan and Andrew Tate, I've got a lot of questions for you, but I guess you can't come here because if you set foot on English soil, you'd be arrested immediately. Dan Wootton, ex-GB News host, and in fact any of the guests who have featured on Dan Wootton Outspoken, yet another home of free speech. I would like to ask you, who are Martin Branning and Maria Joseph? Are those the identities that you used to catfish gay men into sending you dick pics so that you could blackmail them, as reported by the Byline Times? Douglas Murray, I would like you to be a man. Come down here, face the Muslims like I have, instead of pretending that they will kill you, and justify your absurd claim that Hamas and indigenous resistance to an invasive Western population are worse than the Nazis. Andrew Gold, the boring Jew. I'd like to know why it's fine for you to call yourself a Jew, but when I do the same thing, I'm a far-right racist. Explain. Danny Tommy Robinson's right-hand man. Where have you been since telling everyone to kick off, which has now led to some seriously long-term jail sentences and about 2,000 arrests? Where are you? You're the one that told him to do it. And finally, Calvin Robinson. Are you really a follower of Jesus Christ? If so, why do you avoid Christians like my friend Sean, like the plague, choosing to spend all your time with Jews, atheists, and sodomites on their podcasts? That's my list of cowards who are making a living off of free speech and claiming that it's under attack. And yet, how many months have we been doing this? Probably about three. We're on for 3. Now, these guys should be down here because this is the home of free speech. If you have an idea to defend, you should do it here. And the thing is, I'm going to keep calling you guys cowards every 2 weeks, and you are forfeiting. You are forfeiting. About half these guys to run out of the country.
I was going to say, I think it'll be difficult for Calvin. I wouldn't raise your hopes that he'll be here. I think he's left the country.
Yeah, exactly.
And all I can say is, well, you know, that's a good day for England because he claims to be a Christian, but his job seems to be to demonize Muslims. Can I just say briefly on that? He was on with Ezra Levant, that's the Jewish millionaire that runs Rebel News, a Canadian media man, and Calvin was on with him recently, and Calvin is decrying his own Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, for raising the temperature following the riots instead of calming things down. Well, that's very hypocritical of Calvin because Calvin was at the first Tommy rally by live stream and he spent the whole time just demonizing Muslims. Calling Muhammad, I hate to say the words, a warmongering pedophile, saying that it was Islam was a death cult. That's not very Christian, Calvin. So, you know, sorry. I think you need to...
No, it's not. And
I think it's worse than ignorance. I think he's deliberately doing the Jews' bidding.
Yeah, so my theory about all of this is that men like this are paid to terrify men that look like me and you of Muslims and get us to never talk to them. And that's why me standing on the box and saying, hey, Muslims, let's have a chat, is supposed to break down that barrier and actually prove that it's all a myth. Because that is the narrative that Tommy Robinson and Douglas Murray are trying to brainwash the British people with. They're trying to scare them. They are. You can shake your head, but it happened to me. I read Douglas Murray's Strange Death of Europe in about 2018. I was working in an office at the time, surrounded by Muslims who were very nice, all of different characters. I look back on them very fondly now, because for about 2 years, I was dealing with this double think in my head, which was like, these guys are nice, but they're also part of a cult that wants to take over my country and destroy everything, and they take sex slaves, and that's why the grooming gangs happen. I was living in absolute terror, and I've since learned that Douglas Murray is not a concerned patriot, no matter how much you shake your head. He's paid by organisations like the Henry Jackson Society and what are the other ones?
What do you think grooming gangs
the Horowitz Freedom
What do you
Centre?
think grooming gangs happen?
Well, look, I think it's a category error with grooming gangs. I think it's a category error. A category error. Tommy Robinson says that all of the men who groomed these girls are Muslim, and they did it because they are Muslim. I think that's a category error. I think that they were not following the rules of Islam.
But do you think that there's something in that culture which maybe...
Potentially, but I think there's also something very rotten in the culture of the BBC.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
As a Pakistani, we use constantly blame that my culture, my people are the ones that are pushing forward this pedophilia. Every time you have a case of pedophilia, it's a Muslim Pakistani. But when you have someone like Rolf Harris, when you have someone from the BBC,
I totally agree with
the
you.
point is, why don't we see
Parliament.
a Christian white person on the front covers of Daily Mail? Why do we always have to see a Muslim Pakistani?
You also know that in these grooming gangs, you know that when things get a bit hot, these people escape to Pakistan, and there's unfortunately a culture where they were
talking about the amount of pedophiles in Israel.
the poorer people.
Can we talk about Jeffrey Epstein?
I'd love to.
There's a 40,000 bounty out for Jeffrey Epstein's yearbook. If anybody can get his hands on the 1969 yearbook, $40,000. It has been removed. It is nobody who has been to that high school is allowed to talk. Reporters have reached out. You'll find it on LinkedIn. $40,000. Anybody who can get the 1969, I think it's somewhere in New York.
There should be a lot of copies. It should be everyone from that year,
For example.
Yeah, that's amazing. I am learning the Jeffrey Epstein saga inside and out from. I am your man, because, very much so, because I've become friends with the woman that blew the whistle on him in the 90s within the past 2 months, and I speak to her every single day because they're still after her to silence her. And a huge part of the Epstein saga that people don't understand that I learned from her is client list and island are red herrings. Did you know that? That's interesting, isn't it? because the MAGA, QAnon, basically the Donald Trump supporters, they have a narrative that Jeffrey Epstein was having these baby blood drinking parties on the island, and it's all about adrenochrome.
Like temple built on his island.
Exactly.
If you've seen it.
Yeah. Now, it's not so. This is all a narrative to get people to think that Donald Trump is fighting the very thing that he's a part of, because there is nobody on earth that there is more evidence was a close friend of Jeffrey Epstein in the 90s than Donald Trump. And when I say this out loud, Donald Trump's defenders say, no, you've got to get close to the bad guys so that you learn what they're about and stuff. And I'm like, no, let me say it again. You're endlessly yapping about release the client list. Donald Trump's the first man on it. The court documents have already been released, and nobody's been able to falsify them for me. And they state, they're very graphic, so I'm sorry to say it out loud, but they state that Donald Trump was basically in competition with Jeffrey Epstein to take the virginity of a 12-year-old called Katie Johnson. Really horrendous. Really horrendous. Now, why is Donald Trump in the position he's in as a presidential candidate yet again? And how does he feel about Palestinians and their human rights? He doesn't. Exactly the same as Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and Robert Kennedy Jr. Robert Kennedy Jr. has said some of the most disgusting things I've ever heard about Palestinians. These are the people who are allowed to run for president. They also just so happen to be the people that Maria Farmer saw walking into this Epstein property over and over again in the 90s. And so that's one thing that I really want to break. I think that people that are still on the Donald Trump train are insane, right-wingers, right?
I have a comment, if I may. Can I kindly request you to change your address of to Jews, because what you started with earlier, and I think you repeated this just a couple of minutes ago, is not accurate.
No, I think it is.
The rest that you have is said is very accurate. But the people, you talk about anti-Semitism.
I don't.
I
think anti-Semitism is a useless term.
It is, but do people understand what a Semite is? To be anti-Semite to begin with?
Exactly. No, I agree.